Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2, 3. Check, check. It's not going to be microphone.
What's the, sorry, what did you, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. Oh, okay. Good afternoon. Woo. It is very good to see you all here. Thank you for coming and for sharing a love of MCC Ontario. We are very grateful for your support and for your ongoing and continued engagement and interest in this organization that we all love. So as we begin together, let me say a word of prayer for us as we begin. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for MCC Ontario. Thank you for how you called it into being, how you've blessed it through all these years. And today we especially thank you for the leaders that you have called to MCC Ontario. And we bring to you Rick especially, and for his faithful years of service here at MCC Ontario. Thank you for blessing him and guiding him in that, and for his ongoing leadership with us even through the end of this day. So we thank you for being with us. We pray that you would help us to hear your voice in the midst of all that is sung and said and done today. And we pray all of these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, I would like to introduce our song leaders. Chris and Phil are here somewhere. There they are, yes. So please lead us in song.
When we were asked to lead music today, Rick had some suggestions that came from this book, which is something that he got in his first experience with MCC garden.
Summer garden.
Summer garden. But we're not going to start with this. We're going to start with a song called Love the Lord Your God. I think the words are up here. And this is the theme of the day, so we thought this would be a good way to start. And the song is was a little more complicated than what Phil and I could do, so we're just going to do the bare minimum of the song. So we're going to sing through the chorus once, and if you know it, please sing along, but we'll sing through the chorus once, then we'll sing it again, and then we'll do the verses. Whatever you know, please join in as you're able.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength. Let all that is within you praise the Lord. With all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength, praise the Lord. I will sing. Sorry to do that first.
Yes.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength. Let all that is within you praise the Lord. With all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength, praise the Lord. I will sing to the Lord while I have been. I will set my mind on things above. I will pray in the Spirit without ceasing. I will fill my heart with truth and love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength. Let all that is within you praise the Lord. With all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength, praise the Lord. Find your strength in walking with the Spirit. Find your heart in Christ's unchanging love. Seek the length and breadth and depth of wisdom. Fill your soul in the fullness of our God. The Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength. Let all that is within you praise the Lord. With all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength, praise the Lord. Let the lives we live reflect God's glory. Let the love we share reflect God's grace. May we walk in truth and understanding. May we grow in wisdom all our days. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength. Let all that is within you praise the Lord. With all your heart and soul, with all your mind and strength, praise the Lord.
Thank you. I should have introduced myself before. I'm sorry. I'm Karen Cornice, the chair of the MCC Ontario board these days. And it is my honor to introduce our guest speakers, Kath and Peter, who are somewhere. Oh, there they are. Here. So Kath and Peter are active members at First Mennonite Church here in Kitchener. 3 months married, they began their first service assignment with MCC in Brazil from 1979 to 1982. Peter worked in agricultural projects as well as with cistern wells and outhouses, all working with agricultural clubs in rural northeast Brazil. Kath taught nutrition and hygiene in local schools while modeling alternative teaching methods and promoted clay water filter projects. A fairly eclectic and well-skilled couple, clearly. Peter worked for 30 years in the corn research business. Kath served as Human Resources and International Volunteer Exchange Program Coordinator at MCC Ontario from 2000 to 2012. And together they served with MCC as Ethiopia reps from 2012 to 16, and mostly as interim reps for South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland for 7.5 months this year. Kath is currently working for MCCO again as the IVEP coordinator. They have 3 adult children in Cambridge, England, Burnaby, BC, and Cambridge, Ontario, and 1 adorable 2-year-old granddaughter. So with that, please let's welcome Kath and Peter.
If you can't see the screen, you might want to move. Okay?
Salam Nachu. This is a standard greeting in Ethiopia, and it means, "Are you at peace?" And the standard response is Salam No, which means, "I am at peace." The other response to any greeting is Exabir Yemeskin, which means God be praised. Ethiopia is a country of faithful people. 40% Ethiopian Orthodox, 40% Muslim, 20% Evangelical Christian. So to respond with God be praised is appropriate for all faiths.
This afternoon, we would like to share with you about our lives and work in Ethiopia based around 2 scriptures. The first is from the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verse 14, which reads, "Make every effort to live in peace with all and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord." The threefold mandates of MCC are relief, development, and peace in the name of Christ. Pursuing peace with everyone is central to the work of MCC and this call in Hebrews. MCC's work in Ethiopia is a concrete expression of this instruction.
The second scripture is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 58, beginning with verses 6 and 7. "Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh." This is the ministry and the service that we are all called to.
In a country of more than 95 million people, Addis Ababa is the capital with about 4 million people, and this was our home. It hosts embassies and consulates from all over the world. It is also the base of the African Union as a center for discussion and collaboration on issues affecting the 54 African nations on the continent. Addis is also home to several thousand non-governmental organizations, both humanitarian and faith-based, national and international. As a nation with millions of vulnerable, marginalized people, Ethiopia has many foreign governments and international organizations seeking to assist. Just weeks into the beginning of our 4-year term with MCC, we shared at our weekly staff devotional that we have never felt so small since our arrival in Ethiopia. With only 6 people working for Mennonite Central Committee Ethiopia, we are very small indeed. During our 4 years in Ethiopia, we were continually challenged with the reality of working against what at times seemed insurmountable difficulties. So what can one person or one very small organization working on behalf of Mennonite Central Committee, the Mennonite and Brethren in Christ churches of North America do?
During our devotional, we shared 2 stories. It was a chilly, overcast day when the horseman spied the little sparrow lying on its back in the middle of the road. Reining in his mount, he looked down and inquired of the fragile creature, "Why are you lying upside down like that?" "I heard the heavens are going to fall today," replied the bird. The horseman laughed. "And I suppose your spindly legs can hold up the heavens." "One does what one can," said the little sparrow. One does what one can.
Another story. "Tell me the weight of a snowflake," a coal mouse asked a wild dove. "Nothing more than nothing," was the answer. "In that case, I must tell you a marvelous story," the coal mouse said. "I sat on a branch of a fir close to its trunk when it began to snow. Not heavily, not in a giant blizzard, no, just like in a dream without any violence. Since I didn't have anything better to do, I counted the snowflakes settling on the twigs and needles of my branch. Their number was exactly 3,741,952. When the next snowflake dropped onto the branch, nothing more than nothing, as you say, the branch broke off. Having said that, the coal mouse flew away. The dove, since Noah's time and authority on the matter, thought about the story for a while and finally said to herself, "Perhaps there's only one person's voice lacking for peace to come about in the world. What can one person do?"
As we shared these scriptures and stories with our staff, we talked about what we can do as a small organization. To the 16 partner organizations that we work with, throughout Ethiopia, we were not small. With an annual budget of about 3 million Canadian dollars, MCC Ethiopia is an integral part of their work as partners in reforestation, food security, health, support for refugees, education, and sustainable livelihoods. We would like to share with you this afternoon about the ministry and service of one small organization, Mennonite Central Committee, Ethiopia.
MCC has been working in Ethiopia since 1946, serving alongside Eastern Mennonite missions. While EMM stayed in the country working with hospitals and educational institutions, MCC left for another number of years and returned in 1972. From that time until about 2011, the 2 organizations were registered in the country as Mennonite Mission in Ethiopia and worked collaboratively with their parallel missions. In 2011, the last EMM personnel left Ethiopia, and MCC has continued with re-registration as MCC Ethiopia. From very humble beginnings of walking alongside Ethiopians in service and ministry, the first Ethiopian was baptized in the church in 1951. From the beginning, EMM promoted an independent Mennonite church and indigenous leadership, and even the naming of the church was left to the Ethiopians. Mesereti Christos, which means Christ is the foundation church. Okay. 30 years later, in 1982, the evangelical churches were all closed by the communist regime in Ethiopia that had overthrown Haile Selassie in the 1970s. This forced the Masoreti Christos Church of 5,000 members to go underground, and also necessitated an end to the close relationship of MKC with MCC, or MCC would have been forced to leave the country if it was directly associated with the church. However, MCC's compound where we lived and had our office did provide space in a shipping container where, under cover of darkness, key leadership of MKC would slip in and meet to prepare Bible study material for the church for the coming week, which was meeting in small groups throughout the city and adjacent areas. They would arrive one by one, so not to raise suspicion, and gather around the mimeograph machine to copy the material, and then slip out one by one before dawn. Groups would meet in homes, and as a very strong part of the culture, this would often be around coffee. Coffee ceremonies are a common occurrence in homes, usually with women gathering to share about their daily lives. No problems here. During the time that the church was underground, this was how the church grew. This continued until the communist regime was overthrown in 1991, and MKC came out from underground with 50,000 believers, a tenfold increase. Since that time, the church has increased another tenfold, and they now have 500,000 participants in 930 churches and 1,000 worship centers or emerging congregations. It is an active, alive, growing, and vibrant church in local communities and is the single largest conference that is part of Mennonite World Conference. MCC Ethiopia partners with Masoreti Christos Church in various ways.
In 2007, the prison ministry of MKC had noticed a high incidence of revenge killings in the Mehelmeda community, about 5 hours north of Addis Ababa. Adultery and animal grazing over neighboring land boundaries caused the majority of these revenge killings. In 2007, the project began. When the project began, there were about 45,000 revenge killings, 45 revenge killings annually in this district. In 6 years, this was reduced to about 3 per year. One of the major ways that the project was able to affect change so quickly was the integrated nature of the training and support. The local government, police, Orthodox Church, community elders, prison administration, women's leaders, and project coordinators, all working together to support this project. Following the training, one Orthodox priest commented, "We used to be an Old Testament people, and now we are a New Testament people. They used to practice an eye for an eye, and now practice Jesus' words of reconciliation." The project not only addressed revenge killings, but also other harmful practices, such as early marriage, including abductions, witchcraft, female genital mutilation, ritual mourning, and ritual feasting. One story from this project. This young woman was married for 18 months when she and her husband got into a dispute with her parents over some grain that they felt was owed to them. When her parents took the step of contacting a witch doctor to put a curse on the young couple, the young husband acted and killed his mother and father-in-law. He escaped and hid in the woods for almost 2 years, and during this time the women's family searched for him, growing desperate to revenge their parents' death. The woman's brother killed the uncle of the woman's husband. He turned himself in and was in prison when his brother-in-law was captured. Now these two men had been childhood friends and began talking in prison about wanting to return to their home communities upon their release. The same community. But this would be impossible without some sort of reconciliation. So with the help of a project facilitator, they discussed their conflict, and with much support and discussion were able to reconcile, which then led to their extended family beginning the reconciliation process. This photo is of the woman, the son of the uncle who was killed, and the facilitator who worked with the two families. One project, two families. What can one organization do? Pursue peace with everyone, a concrete expression of commitment to peace.
MCC also partners with a number of other faith-based development and secular organizations in Ethiopia. When we say partner, we should describe our relationship to the organizations that we partner with. MCC is a funding agency, not an implementing one. We give funds to other organizations to do the work in food security, health, refugee support, peace, and education. Our relationship with these partners is to build their capacity, so we help to network these agencies with other like-minded organizations, provide training in areas such as conservation agriculture and teacher training, as well as training on proposal and report writing. And then we and our program staff walk alongside the partners to assist them in meeting the needs of those they serve. Due to visa restrictions, Peter and I were the only North American workers with MCC in Ethiopia. But we had 4 great national staff, as well as all of these support staff, like guards and cooks and cleaners.
MCC Ethiopia has been working with the Megbare Sinai Children and Family Support Organization for the past 9 years. This project has worked with local farmers to stop erosion of massive gullies and subsequent loss of farmland. These gullies have expanded as farmers have tried to increase their farmland by cutting down trees and plowing to the edges of eroded areas. Rainy season is generally an intense time of daily rains for about 4 months of the year, often in heavy downpours. At the start of this project, one gully was 14 acres in size. This is an area where the average farm size is about 1/2 acre. So this was the equivalent of 28 families losing their land. Check dams are built, and trees and grass are planted on the terrace slopes and in the gullies to slow down the water. This project has seen immediate benefits to the local watershed, as well as benefiting farmers who live downstream. Springs that were dry are re-emerging. Wildlife is returning to the area. Farmers can selectively harvest trees for income, and fields have been returned to productivity. This picture shows one of the gullies, or the same gully, 4 years after some rehabilitation. In the past year, this rehabilitated farmland has been home to a new project, conservation agriculture, encouraging farmers to till less, leave mulch on the land, and to rotate their crops, all with the hope of further restoring the land and bringing increased yield. 2 other MCC partners are also introducing conservation agriculture, which in a country where 83% of the population are subsistence farmers, the importance cannot be understated. In 5 years, this project hopes to reach approximately 20,000 farmers. One partner, land restored, food for the hungry.
In the country of Somaliland, a 2-day drive from its capital, Hargeisa, a day driving on pavement, and a day driving off-road through the arid countryside with pastoralists and their herds of black-headed Somali sheep and camels, MCC supports a maternal and child nutrition project through World Concern. In an area with poor health supports, mothers have been trained to support mothers, encouraging them to breastfeed their children, to practice good hygiene and sanitation, and to use mosquito nets for protection against malaria. Since the project began in October of 2014, the number of women who exclusively breastfeed their children under 6 months has increased from 9% to over 80%. Through the introduction and support of 248 care group volunteers, women are being empowered and lives and families are being changed.
MCC began supporting the Remember the Poorest school about 9 years ago, one of 3 education projects that MCC supports. It is the only free preschool in the community, and one of the criteria for children to enter this school is that their parents must earn less than $20 a month. Unfortunately, even at this low wage, there's a waiting list. 20% of the parents beg for a living. Another 20% are often single-parent families and involve mothers who are commercial sex trade workers. This past year, there were 241 students between the ages of 4 and 7, divided into 6 classes. There are 8 teachers and 4 teachers' aides. In the past few years, they began using the Montessori method of teaching, which is very unusual within an educational system that relies on rote repetition. In 2015, a drought in the country meant a shortage of food and a hike in staple food costs. For already vulnerable families, this meant that some children were dropping out of school due to hunger, or families needed to leave the area for less expensive housing or shared accommodation with relatives. Through emergency MCC funding, a daily lunch school feeding program was introduced, which has seen the attendance at the school stabilize and children's attention span and energy for learning increase. A project that changes lives, loosing the chains of injustice, untying the cords of the yoke.
In the Afar region of northeastern Ethiopia, not far from the border with Eritrea and Djibouti, and close to the Danakil Depression, one of the hottest areas on Earth at an elevation of 170 meters below sea level, another partner of MCC, the Afar Pastoralist Development Association, seeks to meet the needs of pastoralists whose whole communities, whole livelihood, whole diet, and whole sense of family revolve around goats and camels. The droughts of the past years meant little fodder for the animals, and more than 500,000 animals died of starvation and illness. MCC's support in the past year has purchased 10 goats per family, 1 male and 9 female, for 470 families and provided the goats with supplemental feed as needed. The rains arrived in a timely manner this past year, and the goats are thriving and reproducing and providing much needed milk for family diets, such as Miriam, who is 12 years old and helps to take care of the family goats with her mother.
Ethiopia is now hosting approximately 700,000 refugees from South Sudan, Somalia, and Eritrea. MCC is partnering with International Medical Corps on the west of Ethiopia, where South Sudanese refugees are fleeing a drought and the conflict and violence of South Sudan, arriving in Ethiopia with only the clothes on their back. More than 200,000 have arrived since the beginning of 2014. When we visited 3 of the camps in September of 2015, we passed 25 buses loaded with refugee families making their way to the new camp as the other camps were full. Amongst the South Sudanese refugees, 72% are children, 20% are women, and 8% are men. Thus, the children are most often being raised in families with mothers who have often had to flee South Sudan on foot by themselves and are struggling to settle in a new country with new foods and a very new life. When people arrive in the camps, their housing is made from United Nations plastic sheeting, But as quickly as possible, they build traditional tukals made from mud and sticks and use the plastic sheeting or tarps as roofs, which they then replace as soon as possible with grass. Although it's clear that people are in a refugee camp, the authorities have opted to leave much of the natural vegetation and trees in place and clear out the underbrush. This leaves the camp looking more like a village. In these camps, MCC is supporting refugee families with blankets and school kits. However, the most significant support that MCC has been providing is canned meat, beef, chicken, and turkey. Since August of 2015, 14 containers of canned meat have been shipped to Ethiopia, with 12 of those containers going to South Sudanese refugees and 2 containers going for Eritrean refugees at the request of the Ethiopian government, since the plight of the Eritreans has not received much international attention or support. Through its partner, International Medical Corps, MCC has provided meat, which is used as supplementary food to the basic rations, and outpatient therapeutic programs for more than 5,000 children, 6 to 23 months, as well as pregnant and lactating mothers who are severely to moderately malnourished. The rates of general acute malnutrition range from 21 to 30%, and 46% of the children up to 5 years of age, 20% of the non-pregnant women are anemic. So the importance of adding this protein-rich supplement to the diets of the malnourished women and young children is crucial. People without homes provided with the necessities of life, dignity begins to be restored, providing the poor wanderer with shelter, clothing the naked, sharing food with the hungry.
There are 1.2 million people living with HIV or AIDS in Ethiopia and 825,000 orphans. The stigma and discrimination are great, and people are seeking any cures that can be found. This has brought thousands of people, mostly women infected with HIV, to the healing waters near the local Ethiopian Orthodox Church on Entoto Mountain on the outskirts of Addis. Into this setting, Beza International Church began a ministry working both with the women and children affected by HIV. MCC's involvement began by supporting a project that taught women jewelry making skills and earned money for them to support their families rather than working as daily laborers, carrying wood down the mountains. 4 years ago, Beza began a tutoring and counseling program for the children of these women. And this has not only helped raise the academic level of the 200 children, but also given them a safe place to talk about the bullying they faced as children of HIV survivors. Setting the oppressed free and breaking every yoke, pursuing peace with and for everyone. What can
one person do? We are reminded of the words of Mother Teresa. God did not call us to be successful. He calls us to be faithful.
After the call to serve that we read earlier from verses 5 and 6 of Isaiah 58, the words continue with a promise to the faithful. Verses 8 to 12 read, "Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, 'Here I am.' If you take away from the midst of you the yoke, the pointing of the finger, and speaking wickedness, If you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness and your gloom be as the noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire with good things and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters fail not. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach. One person, one small organization, supported by the many Mennonite and Brethren in Christ churches responding to the call to be faithful, a call to let the oppressed go free, to share bread with the hungry, a call to pursue peace with everyone. That is what one person, one organization, one community can do.
Thank you, Kath and Peter, for sharing these stories of struggle and suffering and restoration and reconciliation and the faithfulness of one small organization that maybe isn't so small, depending how you look at it. Thank you very much. We turn now to the words of Don Peters. It is Don Peters' last day as Executive Director of MCC Canada before he makes room for the new guy. And we tried to get him to come and speak with us today, but he had a few things on the go. So he put together a video for us. There's actually 2 other MCCs in Canada who have AGMs today. So this is going to be shared at a few AGMs, and these are the parting words of Don Peters as he takes his step out of the role of MCC Canada Executive Director.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in the AGMs of MCC Ontario, MCC Alberta, and MCC British Columbia, all occurring on the last day of September 2017. As many of you know, this is also my last day for MCC. When I last met with the Canada Board in June, I shared with them a short little reflection on time in MCC, which I called Precepts for the Journey. And I based that on my grade 12 copy of Shakespeare's play Hamlet, in which a minor character of Shakespeare's in this play, called Polonius, makes some remarks, precepts for a journey of his son Laertes, who is going to travel. And Polonius says to Laertes, his son, "There, my blessing with thee, and these few precepts in thy memory." So what I'd like to do is to share what I shared with the Canada Board at the June meeting with you, calling them precepts for the journey, with this little bit of a twist, and that is that I'm the one leaving MCC, but MCC has been on a journey since 1920 and will continue this journey. And maybe there's a second twist in it, because the precepts I'm giving to you now are also precepts that I will receive, because I will be a supporter of MCC on September the 30th and from that day on. So Polonius has a number of precepts for Laertes, his son, and I have 10, and I promise you they're relatively short. Here they are. Number 1, keep an eye on Jesus. We consistently and easily affirm our byline, service in the name of Christ. Let's acknowledge the presence of Christ in our space when we meet and when we work. I don't mean by this that let's have a devotional to start a meeting. Of course we do that, and we should. What I mean is, let's take seriously the fact that we believe that Christ is the center of our work, that Christ is actually present with us when we plan to do our work, when we execute it, that Christ is a third party in our deliberations at any time and at all times. 2, a sacred mission. Let's remember that the mission of MCC, to share God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ by responding to basic human needs and working for peace and justice. That mission is a sacred mission. that we who are privileged to engage in this mission are on sacred ground. 3, let's focus on the mission. Let's use the past to create the future. MCC isn't just anything. MCC has a history, an identity, a reputation. MCC is not to be recast into what some would just want it to be today, like the new Coke of a few years ago, if you remember that. Rather, the Kellogg's cornflakes that I had for breakfast today, if I had them, or at age 12, is the same Kellogg's cornflakes that I had this morning. That's not to say that MCC shouldn't change and become more relevant given the circumstances of today's world. It must do that. It is saying that whatever changes we make must retain the heart of what MCC is and has been, and mustn't vary from that. 4th precept, let's stay rooted in the church. When we entered the new wineskins process a number of years ago, we asked the question, is MCC a church agency or is it parachurch? And we chose the former. In retrospect, while we included church leaders in the deliberation, we never really probed what it meant from the church's perspective to be owners of MCC. And the church has changed a lot since MCC began in 1920, and it's going through a dramatic change even as we speak. We may not recognize it in 5 years. A shift from national to regional to local areas of church influence. MCC can stay rooted in the church without the identical structures that we've employed in the past to define church ownership. As MCC continues into the journey, let's look for opportunities and openings within the Anabaptist churches. Let's create them where we don't see them, and let's go beyond the formal Anabaptist conferences. There are a lot of closet Anabaptists out there, and even more people who would be Anabaptists if they knew they had a choice. Open the governance structures to acknowledge and welcome such ownership. 5th, let's not afraid to be bold. MCC during the Vietnam era put itself out there. MCC engagement in Iran puts MCC out there. Martin Luther King wrote from the Birmingham jail, quote, "Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection," end of quote. So let's be bold, even if some will turn away. 6th, let's keep an eye on people. Keep an eye focused on the people we are here to serve. I have 4 images that I'd like to show you now of faces that will stay in my memory forever. I pass them to you for your memory and for your memory of other faces like these. The first, the woman in the purple headdress, pointed to me and then to her eyes and said, "Remember me, remember me," a Syrian taking refuge in Lebanon. The second is of women in the high country of Guatemala, working at drought mitigation strategies by collecting rainwater and doing kitchen gardens. The woman in the light pink sends a message through Michael Chapman, our MCC representative at the time. She said, of me, she said, "I hope that he can see we have nothing here." The third image is of a woman in Ethiopia, an evangelist for conservation agriculture, demonstrating the difference in appearance and texture of fattened soil, as she called it, and soil as yet unaffected by conservation agriculture. And in the fourth image, a picture of an Ethiopian group of people or community who welcomed us into their home for something to eat and drink after a hot and tiring visit to an artesian well that MCC helped cap for community use. People in this community can now fetch safe drinking water up and down the hillside. The woman on the far right said, quote, "I never imagined in my lifetime that I would have water like this." Let these faces and the faces of people like them occupy dominant space in every meeting of the board and staff. Seventh precept, keep an eye on staff and an eye on the board. Monitor where our eyes are focused. If we're spending more time looking in than looking out, we're not properly focused on the mission and on the people we're here to serve. Eighth precept, MCC within the Canadian fabric. Let's not underestimate the impact that MCC can have within the Canadian NGO community, faith community certainly, but secular as well, and with government. There is 0% risk that MCC will be arrogant or rude. So let's not be shy about who we are, about why we do what we do, and how we work. Ninth precept, MCC Canada and MCC US. The relationship is good. It involves personality, yes, but it also involves board commitment. It is not an option for the relationship between Canada and the United States, at least in MCC, to not work well. I hope I got the double negatives right. So let's pay serious attention to it. And 10th precept, MCC in Canada. Let's keep working at the Canadian MCC dynamic until the whole Canadian MCC team sounds like a well-rehearsed jazz orchestra should. Improvisation within form. We aren't where we need to be. At best, we have multiple jazz orchestras on the stage, generally playing the same score with some intentional coincidence of musical bars. The luxury of resources has, over the years, slackened our need to get there. Let's establish a timeline. Let's hold ourselves accountable to it. And let's encourage the boards and staff to do the same and expect everyone to do their part. And finally, let's return to Hamlet once again and conclude by saying, "To thine own self be true, MCC, and it will follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to anyone." Thank you, and God bless.
Well, we've been given a charge by Don, and to lead us in a song now, would you please come back and lead us in a song called Unity? So let's take Don's words to heart and consider how we can be unified.
This will not be a jazz rendition. Jesus, help us live in peace. From our bondage set us free. Fill us with your healing love. Help us live in unity. Many times we disagree for what's right or wrong to do. It's so hard to receive from the other's point of view. Jesus, help us live in peace.
thank you, Phil and Chris, for, among other things, humoring me by singing some songs out of that ancient songbook that I was introduced to in MCC in the early 80s. My name is Rick Kober-Baumann, and it's been my pleasure and honor and privilege to serve as the Executive Director of MCC Ontario for almost 10 years. So this is a very bittersweet day for me. Watching Dawn up there a moment ago, I spent much of the last 10 days or so with him in Winnipeg. And the refrain from the days that I was there, since his last day was yesterday, was, "I'm still the boss." Several times we'd be walking down a hallway and one of the Winnipeg staff would sort of teasingly say, "Oh, wow, 2 bosses," and he would correct them very quickly. It was really good to be with him and to see the depth of relationships, both serious and high capacity, and also joyful and fun that he's joyfully handing off to me. So I'm grateful for that. We consider those of you who come to an annual general meeting to be pretty interested in data and reporting and knowing what's really going on. So I want to walk you through some of what's been happening in MCC Ontario, with the assumption that, along with Kath and Peter's excellent insights into Ethiopia, you've also already or will soon pick up one of these. This annual report is now a bit of an early experiment for us to have MCC Ontario and the whole of MCC all together in one book. So please take a look at that, because what I'm going to be focusing on is much more, how are we doing here in MCC Ontario? About 3 years ago, we were in the heart of a strategic planning conversation here in Ontario, and so we're now in the second year of actually working on that plan. Now, I have to be patient. After I press the button, this will move. There we go. Am I actually doing this, Greg? Okay. It's good to check, because sometimes one has way less power than one thinks.
You're still the boss.
The clock ticks, though, Dave. So these were the 6 goals that we set, not just in MCC Ontario, but all of MCC agreed that we would focus, and focusing isn't easy for MCC, trust me. We do a lot of things well, but we believe we will do things better if we do fewer things. So access to clean water, food, and livelihoods, innovative peace building, partnering intentionally with churches and our communities, expanding opportunities for young adults to serve, growing our donor base and donations, and then, actually number 6 is in Canada only, focusing on thrift as a key marketing face of MCC. I think our board has thanked us for introducing a dashboard with stoplights. And we would like to see all of them green. As you go through this, you'll see there are some yellows, and I'll say a little bit about that. Essentially, green means we're on track to meet our goals at the end of this 5-year strategic plan, which interestingly takes us up to our centennial in 2020. Red says we're really not on track, and some serious correcting of the course needs to happen. You'll see a couple of yellows, which are a caution to say that right now it looks like, from our baseline of, in this case, 5 projects that we're working at in partnership to address food, water, and education or sustainable livelihoods here in Ontario, we're still at the baseline, and it's year 2. Now, some of this actually has to do with how we do our measuring, and also the fact that some of our church partners moved very thoroughly into refugee sponsorship over the last several years, for which we were grateful, but refugee sponsorship is, no matter how many people are doing it, only one project. So we're not alarmed at this one, but it's a reminder that we want to continue to work in partnership on these 3 areas. Oh, now I probably hit a pause button, did I? Peace building, another yellow. I want to say that here we think we're also getting better at measuring, and we've done some consolidation of our projects. If you had come to our annual meetings over the years, you wouldn't see this kind of reporting. And so as we were collecting our data and realizing we're probably trying to measure too much detail here, so we did some consolidation. So part of our still being at baseline is a result of consolidating those projects. I also want to say an introduction here and honor, pay tribute to Eileen Henderson, who's been giving leadership to our restorative justice work for 16 years. And I'd like to introduce Rod Friesen, who has taken that role over just in the last few months. So that's a big change for us. And welcome, Rod. And also want to say thank you to Eileen. Program participants. Here we're doing very well. We're back to a green light. You see that we've blasted through our expectations in terms of the numbers of people that are participating in our projects. And of course, many of them being refugees, most of them from Syria in the last several years, are very much part of our definition of uprooted and vulnerable peoples. Last week during the MCC Canada AGM, I had neglected to turn off my cell phone, which I didn't neglect to do today, and I got a call from Mohammed. Mohammed and Falak are the father and mother of the family that our church was part of sponsoring. And his message was, and it's not an uncommon one, would you be able to help sponsor my mother now to bring her from Lebanon and to come to Canada? So we're going to hear those stories a lot. Another yellow. This is probably the one that I am most concerned about. And there are a couple of lines that you might wonder why we'd be concerned. Our volunteers, again, that's partly because of the people working in sponsorship of refugees, are well above our baseline. We're doing fine. Our MCCO staff is growing. And we actually have lots of young people, half my age, people that could be my children, are doing excellent work at MCC Ontario. But this one, international service workers, is not going in the direction it should be. So we scratch our heads a little bit about that. We wonder what's changed, that there seem to be less people prepared to serve internationally. And we put an invitation to you, if this is possible for you or possible for people that you know. We are doing some hard work at developing a working group to both determine what some of the changes are and what are we going to have to do to turn that ship and have more people serving from Ontario internationally. And this is not only Ontario. I have to stay in the yellow box, sorry. Thank you for your instructions there, Cheryl. So this traces all three of those items on the previous slide, but the one that I'm worried about is the orange one. We've been, I don't know if I'd say content, but we've been very pleased with our general contributions and the number of donors. We have a strong revenue development team, fundraising team, and we think that even though we were a little hesitant in the early going about is MCC really a fundraising organization, we think we found effective ways of inviting people to invest in MCC. And we have donors who will thank us for coming to them and inviting them to invest in something in which they believe. Probably the 2015-16 slight dip there had to do with Nepal, and also there was lots of donations going to refugees as well, and this is only tracking general contributions. And customers in thrift. We said at the outset that our sixth goal is that thrift becomes a marketing face. We do use that word that starts with M, marketing. Took us a while to get used to it, but we want people not only to be in thrift, donating and purchasing and volunteering, but we want them to know where they are. We want them to know this is an MCC thrift shop. So we're tracking how well do they know, first of all, that there is such a thing as MCC getting the profits, and then what is it that MCC does? And generally, we're seeing movement towards a stronger understanding of MCC as a relief development and peace-building organization. Okay, now I'm too quick. The last thing I want to say is that we are always running a risk registry and making sure that we're keeping up with our IT standards. So those don't lend themselves quite as well to red and yellow and green lights, but we want you to know that in both those cases, we think we're managing risk well and that we are keeping on top of IT changes. So I want to conclude by saying a thank you to our broader constituency and to the board that I've worked with for these years. And I want to say a thank you to the staff, many of whom are here today, our leadership team, and I want to introduce John Head. Many of you know John, but John is taking on the role of interim executive director as of 5 o'clock today, John. And could you stand, John? Many of you know him. He has been our associate executive director. Yes. You know, I'm getting ahead of myself. The board actually has to approve this at about 4:45 this afternoon. John's been working very capably as our associate ED and has agreed, I think he had a choice, in being our interim while the search committee continues to seek a new executive director. So with that, I'd like to invite Karen as chair.
I think this is a good segue. We were hoping to be able to pray for Rick and for John. And John, I'd invite you to come forward here. So let's pray for John and Rick in this day of transition.
Got to get in the pink square here, John.
Oh. All right, let's pray for these two leaders of MCC Ontario. God, thank you so much for the steps that have already been walked with MCC Ontario. Thank you for Rick, for the blessing that he has been to MCC Ontario, and for how you have equipped him for the task at hand, given him the depth of character and insight to carry out the calling that you have given to him. As he steps into the next leg of the journey, God, we send him on his way with our blessing, with gratitude for the impact that he's had here at MCC Ontario, knowing that we will remember him as he takes on his new role with MCC Canada. And we thank you so much for gifting him with leadership and for the steps and the path that you have called him to. And we pray for your blessing over him now and for Louise as well in this time of transition. And God, we lift up to you John as well as he takes this very important interim role on the next step of MCC Ontario's journey, carrying the baton, as Don would say, into the next steps of the future. God, we pray that you would equip him for the path that lies ahead, that you would give him confidence and clarity and compassion as he takes on this role. And we give you such thanks that he is willing to do it and that he's accepted this call into the next steps of the journey that MCC Ontario has. So we lift him up to you, we thank you for him, and we pray that you would have a clear sense, that he would have a clear sense of you being with him in the days ahead. And we pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And with that, we begin the business section of our time together. And so I would invite Dave Thiessen up. Dave is the secretary for the MCC Ontario Board. We have a series of motions that we will need seconders for, and so I would ask that you would consider being a seconder of a motion as the time presents itself. That'll be clear. And if you could just say your name as you get into that, maybe Dave will be taking this, I'm not sure, but please be free to second the motions as they come.
Okay. And it wasn't said, you might think this is a bit of a low-key way to say goodbye to Rick. Tomorrow's when we're going to whoop it up. So at 3 o'clock at Kitchener Mennonite Brethren Church, just a few blocks from here, we're having a worship service and we're having food and refreshments afterwards. So we're hoping to do it up big then, and invite you all to come back for that. Okay, first of all, who is eligible to vote? At each meeting of members, every person who is a congregational representative, a duly authorized delegate actually in attendance, or a member of the board of directors shall be entitled to vote. Unfortunately, provincial legislation still doesn't let us do it online. We tried it a couple of years ago and did it, but it wasn't legal, so we still can't do it. Yeah. I'm going to just briefly review the minutes from our meeting last year.
They are in your packets.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a page number, but I'm sure you can find them if you, does anyone need an extra copy of the business package? Okay.
It's not exactly scintillating reading, so I'm not going to at all, I'm not going to read all of them through. I'm just going to very quickly précis what was in there. So, as per usual, we approved the minutes from the previous year. Then Luke, our treasurer, gave us all kinds of financial information, and we approved the audited financial statements. And then we approved that Carty, Winters, and Simon would be appointed as auditor again. I think as part of Luke's presentation, Auditor Ed Simon, who I see sitting back there, who we'll hear from today, also confirmed what the paper said in person. Okay, we had a nominating committee report and a slate that was approved. Motion number 4. Then we had a review of the strategic plan. There's a typo in the minutes there on number 5. Thanks, Sarah Anderson, for telling me that. It should be 2015, not 2105 to 16, okay? So when I move the adoption of these, please have that change in mind. Yeah, so we basically had the same thing last year as we did this year, only I think this year we're measuring up a little bit better, going in the right direction. And then, to the board's great, great pleasure, last year we had a wonderful general question and answer time. We always want, we want to be accountable to our constituency, and we struggle with how to do that. Last year, we got asked some really good questions, some hard questions, and we said, yay. And so I won't go through what all those were, but they're well written up here, and so just want to affirm that. So when there's time today for good questions, please do it again. And yeah.
In 6 as well, where it says Linda Ashford?
Yes.
Trisha Ashford.
Okay. So what's the name?
Trisha?
Trisha Ashworth. So the last person to ask a question was Trisha, Trisha?
Yes.
Okay. And be you that Trisha? Are you that Trisha? So we have it straight from the horse's mouth. Thank you. Okay, and then there was closing remarks. So I move the adoption of these minutes with the changes that we have made as a recording of the meeting from last year.
Thank you, Dave. Is there a seconder for that motion? Yes, back there. We have Margaret.
Margaret, okay.
All right. Any further questions or comments about the minutes? If not, let's call the question. All those in favor, please indicate so by raising a hand. Thank you. All those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? That has unanimously passed. Thank you. All right, with that, I would invite Luke up to take us through the financial statements.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Luke Yancey. I'm the treasurer for the board and a member of Hawksville Mennonite Church. We have a big picture slide here again. Rick's already alluded to it, but it was another very strong year for MCC in terms of revenue generation, particularly in those base measurements that we look at. So the general donations, the designated donations to either MCC Ontario or MCC Canada, and our thrift shops continue to be very strong. They had a very aggressive target last year, and they managed to meet it and go beyond as well again. So. It's been a strong year on the revenue side, and we also, I think last year, lamented that our forwardings, just one slide back there, maybe 2 slides back to the big picture, that one, that our forwardings last year, we were just 27,000 short of hitting that 10 million mark to get to MCC. That's the amount that goes to MCC Canada. You can see this year we blasted past that, almost hit 11 million. So again, just a really strong year. Looking at the detailed breakdown of our revenues and then expenses, I usually just highlight here again that we are fairly diversified in terms of where we get our revenue from. The bulk of it still comes from donations, whether those are there at about 12 o'clock, the general donations, or at about 3 o'clock, the designated donations. Those are ones where somebody says, I want it to go to a certain area, but it's still a regular donation. And then thrift, of course, down at the bottom there is the other big one. But a number of other sources too, material aid, relief sales, estates and trusts. So we are reliant on a number of different sources, which is good if one source goes up or down. On the expense side of things, we've got just a very basic number here. The biggest chunk again is going to be forwarded to MCC Canada. The next biggest chunk there is for programs here in Ontario. And then you've got the amount that we're always keeping an eye on for administration. Capital is in there with administration this time. And then the fundraising, those are the two smallest slivers there. We always highlight our reserves. So the balances in our reserves, where we keep our funds to ensure that we have enough to continue to operate if revenues were to fall at some point in time. You'll see the operating reserve has fallen quite a bit. That's partially by design. We, at the end of last year, had more in there than we would want to have. We don't want to have too many dollars in the reserve fund because those are dollars that could be used for charitable activities. At the same time, there's a balance there. We don't want to have too little because we don't want our operations to be interrupted if at some point revenues did fall in an unforeseen way. So you see it falling now to actually the range that we want it to be in, which is the 2 to 4 months. That last figure there at the bottom is where we try to keep that. So it's in a good spot. This is a little bit of a challenge for us. There's been a policy change, and we are working with MCC Canada in discussions in terms of how we can, we're talking with Rick here again, how we can negotiate ways to keep our own reserves up as that policy has changed. That's ongoing. Hopefully we'll have a resolution sometime fairly soon. And then the last slide is just to note that our auditor last year was Edward M. Simon of the firm Carty, Winters & Simon, LLP. So I have a motion here that the audited financial statements for the fiscal year ended March 31st, 2017 be accepted.
Accepted. Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Thank you, Margaret. Eddie?
Should we, since Ed is here, did you want to make a comment to the public in terms of how the audit went? Just a brief one.
It went very well again this year. We provided a clean audit report and met with the board, of course, and discussed any issues at the board level, and it was another clean year.
It's a great report. Any other questions or comments? All right, all those in favor, please indicate so by raising a hand. Thank you. All those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? That is unanimously carried. I think you have one more motion, yeah? No?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I should do that as well. Second motion here that the firm of Carty, Winters & Simon LLP be appointed as the auditor for MCC Ontario for the 2017-18 year at a fee to be determined by the board.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Thank you, Tricia. Any comments or questions on that? All right, all those in favor, please indicate so by raising a hand. Thank you. All opposed, same sign. Abstentions? That is unanimously carried. Thank you, Lou. You can go now. Okay, and with that, I would invite Lynn, the chair of our nominating committee of the MCC Ontario Board, to come and present for us. I'll clear you some space.
Okay, I'll try to do this without covering the mic. I think I'm good. Okay, we always appreciate the work that our board members do, and what I will first do is present those who are continuing on the board and then recognize those who are leaving the board. So continuing for a second term on the board is Nita Dong and Sarah Anderson. We're nominating them for a second 3-year term. And then joining our board are Nancy Penner from EMC, John Friesen from Old Colony, Matthew Miles from the Be in Christ Church, and Rich Jansen from the Mennonite Brethren. You have their biographies so that you know a little bit more about our new board members. So those are the members that you will be voting on when we approve the slate. In terms of board members who are leaving, we have Tim Wishart, and who has served 2 terms on the board. Nico Thiessen, who was one of our young adult reps from Redeemer. And then we have Jacob Martin, Jacob Ants and Jacob Reimer. So Jacob Ants served 1 term with the from the EMC churches. So I would like to invite those board members who are leaving the board to come up here and join me. Those of you who are here, we'd like to recognize you and thank you for your presence on the board. Okay, so first of all, Nico, thank you very much for your time on the board, and blessings as you move forward in your life. No longer a student, and hoping that you will be joining our board and know that you will continue to support MCC as you go forward. And Tim, thank you very much for your time on the board and for the many ways that you have supported us and all that you've done for us on the board. So thank you very much, and there's a card of appreciation for you. And then Jacob Reimer, he has been on our board for 14 years. That's, yes. And so you not only receive a card with our thanks, but a special gift for this long service. And we have really appreciated your quiet wisdom, the wonderful analogies you bring, and the way that you provide such amazing perspective to our board. Thank you so much for your service. And there is a certificate in here, as well as a book with our thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
I want to thank every one of you.
And then you need to stand in the pink spot here.
I'd like to thank every one of you that has come. It has been an exciting, and when I first was approached, I didn't think I would never ever make it, but I told them that you're going to drag me all the way. But Rick has been very helpful in that area. And I have learned a lot, and I appreciate every one of you supporting this organization in what it's doing. And I feel blessed to have been able to serve on this, even though I didn't think it was a position for myself. So may the Lord bless, keep you, and provide you with wisdom as I travel on and you travel on in your callings and my callings. Thank you.
Okay. And with that, I move that the proposed slate of nominees be elected to the MCC Ontario Board of Directors for 2017-2018.
Thank you, Lynn. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Anyone? Thank you, Sherry. All right. Any further conversation? Okay, all those in favor, please indicate so by raising a hand. Thank you so much. All those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? That is unanimously carried. And that brings us to our question and answer segment of our time together. What questions, or maybe questions and questions section, I don't know. Any thoughts or questions or comments that any of you might have at this time? Oh, there is a traveling microphone.
Please say who you are, okay?
Kath Wilner, First Mennonite Church, MCC Ontario, IVEP. My question has to do with the low international service worker numbers. When I began as Human Resources Coordinator here in 2000, someone asked me, what skills do you need to be HR coordinator? And I said, I'm not sure, but I don't think I have them. I don't have any training, but I have two things. I love people, and I've served overseas with MCC. And I just want to ask a question here. How many of you are MCC alumni, having served internationally in this room? There's a good number of alumni here. What are you doing with alumni to help you in your recruitment? I think that there are those of us who might have some experience that we might be able to share, be it someone who's been a salter and who could speak at Greybull or Redeemer or in churches, that sort of thing. I think that in my work in HR, I remember thinking that alumni was the most underutilized group of people that MCC has, and I still think it. And I'm just wondering, what can we do to engage alumni more? I mean, people here are here. There's a lot of alumni in this room, and they're here because they are passionate, continue to be passionate about MCC. How can we engage the more than 1,200 people in this province who are alumni? Be it in recruitment, awareness, financial support, whatever we could do to continue making sure that the story of MCC gets out, and whatever that could be.
Thank you, Kath. Do you want to respond? And just while Rick's coming up, I'm happy to say that in my new job at Silver Lake Mennonite Camp, we are making use of alumni of MCC. We're going to be going forward with that. In the past, Silver Lake has done that too. So there are places where it is happening. Not that it's not a broader issue than that, for sure.
Yeah, I think I would mostly say amen, Kath, that we have an enormous resource in alumni, and we probably aren't tapping in as well as we could. I'm hoping that in the centennial, in 3 years, 2.5 years, that there will be a place for, not only through alumni, but more generally to make a strong invitation to the community, both through alumni and otherwise, for continued service internationally. Exactly how alumni will be part of that, I'm not sure, but I think your challenge is completely fair.
Thank you. What other questions or reflections do you have? Margaret.
Margaret Nally, past chair of MCC, Ontario. And it's a place of lamentation that we are not able to continue to welcome the broad range of particularly young adults that are interested in working and being part of the great ministry of MCC. So my prayer of encouragement to keep the conversation alive and to listen deeply to the pain and the hope that is before us, because I do believe they're both there. So this is a conversation that's deep and wide, and we need courage for that journey. So, Rick, courage for this big question that's facing all of us, and encouragement to continue to keep open spaces and hospitality around these questions. So, lamentation and joy.
Thank you, Margaret. We will take that to heart. Oh, yeah.
I'm Ann Hubert, and I'm one of the passionate thrift people, volunteer in St. Catharines. And I just wanted to ask if the thrift people could keep in mind when new changes come. Some of us have been volunteering for many, many years. And as we sit at the lunch table, there's conversation going on. What? We've hired another person when people have worked there for years without being paid, wondering why we need more hired staff. I realize that it's gotten to be a bigger organization, it's getting to be a business, but we still sometimes question the need for more staff that are being paid. Now I've lost my train of thought. Then when new changes come in, I understand we're going to be introduced to a card that we have to punch in and punch out or something like that in the next while. That's something that us older ones don't understand the need for. Mr. Peters talked about keeping in mind the people that are working. We are putting a lot of money into MCC by volunteering our hours at the store, and sometimes it's hard for us to understand why these changes are necessary. I know there was a lot of resistance by some of our people to the new pricing system, but I, being one of the people that do that in the store, I find that it's been an immense improvement for us. But a lot of times the volunteers say, hey, how come nobody ever asks our opinion about changes that are being made? So I'm telling you what I have been told to tell, and we all love working there and we want to continue working there. But we're getting a lot older, so we're losing some of that.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you, first of all, for coming again today and for your ongoing work at the thrift shop in St. Catharines, I think. And I probably can't speak directly to all of your concerns, but I think generally, if we look at the graph of thrift's growth, and you somewhat said it yourself, it is a rapidly growing organization. And we've found that while we try to keep staffing really at the minimum of what we think it takes to run an operation well, the outputs of it, both in terms of the amount of donations that come through and get sold, and then the finances, the revenue that's generated, continue to rise. And so it seems like we're matching reasonably well the amount of staff that we need, even though I know there are many in thrift that operated on a volunteer-only model for a long, long time. And we are very grateful for that, and I think would say that we are now at a place where staffing is a pretty critical piece. Now, in terms of the punch card, that one's new to me. Volgistics. Okay, we have Jan, do you want to say anything about that? It's a volunteer, it's a way of us knowing how to be able to contact all of our volunteers all through MCC Ontario, including thrift. And so this is a way of getting contact information. And I remember, I've told Jan and others on our leadership team, I remember heading off to one of our fall conferences one day on a Friday, looking at the thrift volunteers downstairs and lamenting that we didn't have a way of communicating with each and every one of them just to invite them to our peace conference. And that seemed like a shortcoming. So now with this new way of keeping track of and having information on, contact information, that will no longer be the case. So I think that's probably what you're referring to.
Is there time tracking?
So you will get some introduction. Jan, do you want to say more? I'm the blind leading the blind here. So I trust that you will have some good training. And maybe my last comment about your shop is that with the movement to the current location, with the staffing and volunteers that you've had, you've now outgrown yourself again and are ready for another move. In fact, in an hour in the next room here, our board is going to be reviewing the proposal to move yet another thrift shop to larger locations. So good evidence of the work you're doing being very successful. Thanks, Ann.
Anything else new with thrift?
Oh, yes. So much stuff comes in. The back door, that we can't sell out the front door that Jan back here and her colleagues have said, that's a problem. I think it's up to 75 or 80%. I'm cautious to say that out loud because you're going to think your donations are not well used at thrift. But in fact, those high volumes of donations that we can't sell out the front door are now going to be collected from all our shops across Ontario, taken to the fine metropolis of Elmira. The former Freiburger's grocery store has now been leased, and in not very many weeks, we hope to have the MCC Thrift Depot running, where we will sell some things by the pound, and much of the rest of the material will be baled or shredded or in some other way processed so that we can get a reasonable price for it rather than the often pittance that we're getting for it now in small volumes. So, is that what you had in mind, Dave? That's what I had in mind. So, we're going to be looking for volunteers. I know some of you are already out there inviting people to consider yet another way to add to the several thousand of volunteers that are already working for MCC. Thanks, Dave.
Last question, yes. Bob.
Yes, Bob Nally. I had a question on the First Nations work, MCC Ontario, and of course, Rick, going on to the MCC Canada role. If you could just comment, I haven't heard anything so far about that, but I'm just wondering if you could comment on the importance of this and the role of MCC in the justice and reconciliation work that we need to do in Ontario, certainly, and in Canada.
Yes, thank you, Bob. I would say that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been kind of the most recent heavy push in the system again that MCC has felt created an opening and a larger space. I don't know how the rest of you read the public in Canada, but it feels to me that there's an openness to hear about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in the broad Canadian population, and I think in our own constituency that hasn't always been there. That door may swing partly closed again, but I think generally that's a moment that we're trying to put extra energy into. So we've hired another person here in Ontario, and we have a Truth and Reconciliation Response Committee whose the first year of which was on our board saying, let's build some awareness. The second year now is, what do we do about it? And because we're sitting within 6 miles of the Grand River, we know there's unresolved interest in this land here, and you can look at the plaque at the bottom of the stairs if you want to know more about that story. So we're focused, I would say, quite heavily in Southern Ontario, at least, in trying to make right the relationships with the people that welcomed MCC, really, and other Mennonites to the Grand River Valley. So we're exploring with MDS as well a project about fixing up the former residential school that was run in Brantford and turning it into a museum that would help tell the story of residential schools in Canada. So MCC has been invited to partner with that with MDS, and we're hoping, Sarah, next summer perhaps a youth project where we will be inviting youth from our constituency to be part of a really hands-on reconciliation project. So that's a thumbnail sketch, Bob.
All right, unless there is any other burning question, please feel free to connect with us after the meeting as well if you have other questions for us about MCC Ontario. At this time, I would like to thank Chris and Phil for leading us in music, for Kath and Peter for sharing stories with us and experiences with us, for the MCCO leadership team for all your participation today and in so many ways across MCC Ontario. Thank you very much. For all who were involved in the business section of this meeting, to Louise and Sonia, who I don't, oh, there, Sonia, for registering us today, for Never Enough Time, for catering such tasty food for us, for Cheryl and Katie, I don't know where Katie is, for logistics, and for Carl and Greg for our IT support. So let's give a great round of thanks to all people involved today. So if you are on the MCC Ontario board, you should vacate this room and go. Sonia will show us where to go. Yes, she will. And the rest of you, please go in peace and carry these stories in your hearts. Have a great day.